Maya Lambert moved through the darkened museum with the confidence of someone who had memorized every inch of its architecture. Her fingers brushed lightly against the cool marble wall, counting the steps from the entrance to the first gallery, 23 exactly. The cane in her other hand tapped a quiet rhythm, a metronome that mapped the space and sound. 5 years ago, she had lost her sight in an accident that left her with fragmented memories of light and color, but her hands and ears had become her eyes. That night, she was alone in the Musée Beaumont, a grand neoclassical building undergoing renovations. The security guard had let her in at dusk, knowing she preferred to work when silence enveloped the halls. She was restoring a 17th-century canvas, a meticulous process of cleaning and retouching that she performed by touch and intuition. By 11 o'clock, the museum was hers entirely. She had just set down her brushes when she heard voices echoing from the rotunda below. 2 men. One voice was calm, almost gentle, the other was sharp, agitated. She froze, her fingers hovering over the paint box. Words drifted up through the stairwell, something about a ledger, about paintings that were never meant to be found. Then came a sound she knew too well from her years of listening to audio descriptions of films, the metallic click of a hammer being pulled back. She pressed herself against the wall, breath held. A single gunshot cracked through the silence, followed by the thud of a body hitting the marble floor. Then footsteps, quick and deliberate, retreating toward the east exit. Maya remained motionless for what felt like hours, her heart pounding against her ribs. When silence returned, she crawled to the emergency phone behind the reception desk and dialed the police with trembling fingers. When the police arrived, Maya Lambert was sitting on the museum steps, her white cane folded across her lap, her face pale but composed. She described what she had heard with clinical precision: 2 men, a dispute, a single gunshot, a body falling. The lead investigator, a stern woman named Detective Harlow, listened with visible skepticism. Officers swept the rotunda with flashlights, searching for blood, for a body, for any trace of violence. They found nothing. The marble floors were immaculate. The security cameras, which covered every public area, showed only Maya moving through the halls alone, her cane tapping, her silhouette framed in grainy pixels. No second person appeared on any recording. The museum director arrived shortly after, a polished man named Gerard Vance, who assured the police that the building had been empty except for the restorer. Maya insisted she knew what she had heard. She could distinguish between the echo of her own footsteps and those of another person. She could count heartbeats and the pauses between words. Detective Harlow thanked her for her cooperation but suggested that working alone late at night in a silent building could play tricks on anyone's mind. Maya felt her throat tighten with frustration. She had been blind for 5 years, but she had never imagined her reality. After the police left, she sat in her small studio apartment, running her fingers over a tactile map of the museum she had created with raised lines of glue. She traced the rotunda, the east exit, the staircase. The killer had known exactly where to avoid the cameras. That meant he knew the museum. The next morning, a former police detective named Leo Farrow appeared at her door. He had been fired from the force 3 years ago for refusing to close a case that his superiors wanted buried. He had read the initial report and believed her. He offered his help. Maya, who had learned to trust her instincts, said yes. Leo Farrow was a man in his late 50s with a limp and a worn leather jacket that smelled of coffee. He did not treat Maya like a victim. Instead, he asked her to recreate the night in every sensory detail. They returned to the museum during the day, when tourists filled the halls with chatter and footsteps. Maya sat in the rotunda, her hands resting on the cold floor where she believed the body had fallen. She closed her eyes, a gesture that felt redundant and focused. The two voices. The calm one had a slight accent, perhaps Eastern European, with carefully enunciated syllables. The agitated one was local, breathy, the words tumbling out. She remembered fragments, the ledger proves everything, and you were supposed to destroy it, not keep it. Leo took notes, his pen scratching against paper. He began digging into museum employees, past and present, and into the world of art restitution that operated in the gray spaces between legality and theft. 3 days later, he returned with a name. The victim, he believed, was a man named Viktor Petrov, a freelance investigator who specialized in tracking stolen artworks that had been laundered through legitimate auctions. Petrov had gone missing the same night Maya heard the gunshot. His apartment had been cleaned out, his computer wiped. But Leo had found a contact who mentioned Petrov was working on a case involving the Beaumont, something about paintings that had been looted during the war and had resurfaced with suspicious provenance. Maya traced the raised lines on her map, her fingers pausing at the east exit. The killer had fled that way, past the loading dock, into the alley. She asked Leo to take her there. Standing in the alley, she ran her hands along the brick wall until she found a loose stone. Behind it, wrapped in oilcloth, was a small leather notebook. It was Viktor Petrov's ledger. Inside were names, dates, and a list of paintings whose ownership histories had been falsified. At the top of the list was a painting currently hanging in the Beaumont's main gallery. The painting was titled Woman with a Pearl Necklace, a minor masterpiece from the Dutch Golden Age that the Beaumont had acquired 5 years earlier for a sum that had raised no eyebrows at the time. According to Petrov's ledger, it had been stolen from a Jewish family in Amsterdam in 1942 and had passed through a series of private collectors, each transaction designed to erase its origins. The museum's acquisition had been brokered by a man named Alistair Crane, a British art dealer with a reputation for discretion and a client list that included billionaires and governments. Leo explained to Maya that Crane was not merely a dealer, he was the architect of a system that used high-value art to move money across borders without scrutiny. A painting purchased for $10 million could be sold a year later for $20, with the difference representing laundered funds from any number of illicit activities. The Beaumont's board had been unaware, or had chosen not to look too closely. But Viktor Petrov had looked. And he had been silenced. Maya sat in her studio, her fingers tracing the texture of a small replica she had made of Woman with a Pearl Necklace. She remembered the calm voice from the night of the murder. The accent. The measured, patient tone. She played a recording Leo had obtained from an old interview with Alistair Crane at a gallery opening. Her hand tightened around the replica frame. It was him. The same cadence, the same deliberate pauses. Crane had been in the museum that night, confronting Petrov. And now he knew that someone had been listening. The following afternoon, Maya returned to her studio to find the door unlocked. She never left it unlocked. She stood in the doorway, listening. The air smelled different, something chemical, like cleaning solvent. She moved inside, her cane sweeping ahead of her. The table where she kept her tools had been disturbed, her brushes were not in their usual order. Someone had searched the space. On the floor near her workbench, she heard a faint crunch of glass under her shoe. She knelt and felt the fragments of a small ceramic dish she kept by the window. It had been smashed deliberately. A warning. She called Leo immediately, her voice steady but her hands shaking. He arrived within 20 minutes, his footsteps hard and urgent. He confirmed what she already knew, whoever had killed Petrov now knew that she was the witness. Maya moved out of her apartment that night and into a small hotel room Leo booked under a false name. She brought only her tactile maps, her cane, and a small recording device she used to capture ambient sounds. Leo stayed in the room next door, his hearing sharpened by years of stakeouts. They spent the following days building a case. Leo contacted a journalist he trusted, a woman named Sarah Chen who specialized in art crimes, and fed her information from the ledger without revealing Maya's involvement. Sarah's investigation began to generate heat. A major newspaper ran a story about questionable provenance at the Beaumont, and the museum's board announced an internal review. Alistair Crane issued a statement through his lawyers, calling the accusations baseless and defamatory. But Maya knew that Crane would not let the matter rest. The ledger contained not only the history of the stolen painting but also a list of bank accounts and shell companies that connected Crane to a network of offshore money movements. Petrov had been thorough. And now Crane's entire operation was at risk of exposure. Maya began training her senses in ways she had never needed before. She asked Leo to walk around her hotel room at different speeds, different distances, so she could learn to identify him by gait alone. She practiced distinguishing between the sound of a door being opened with a key and the sound of one being forced. She filled small bottles with different liquids, water, solvent, oil, and learned to identify them by the way they sloshed and the scent they released. Leo watched her with a mixture of admiration and concern. He told her that Crane had a reputation for ruthlessness. 2 other investigators who had looked into his dealings had suffered accidents. One had fallen from a balcony, another had been hit by a car in a hit-and-run that was never solved. Maya listened in silence, then asked him to take her back to the museum. She needed to memorize the soundscape of the building, the echoes of each gallery, the creak of specific floorboards, the way sound traveled through the stairwells. If Crane came for her, she would not be caught unprepared. 3 nights later, the attack came. Maya was alone in the hotel room while Leo had gone to meet Sarah Chen to review the evidence they planned to hand over to federal authorities. She was sitting on the edge of the bed, her fingers tracing the raised lines of her museum map, when she heard a sound that did not belong. The hallway carpet muffled most footsteps, but the door to the stairwell had a specific squeak, a hinge that maintenance had never fixed. She had noted it during her first night in the hotel. The squeak came, followed by soft, deliberate steps approaching her door. Not Leo. Leo's gait was uneven, favoring his left leg. These steps were even, controlled, and light. She reached for her phone, her thumb finding the emergency contact without needing to see. She pressed the button that would send Leo a silent alert. Then she moved. She slid off the bed and crouched behind the heavy wooden dresser against the wall, pressing herself into the narrow gap. Her hand found the cane, but she did not extend it. The lock clicked. Not a key. A pick. The door swung open with a whisper. A man stepped inside. She could hear his breathing, slow, steady, unhurried. He moved through the room with confidence, checking the bathroom first, then the closet. His shoes made a soft scuff on the carpet, and she noted the sound, leather soles, slightly worn. He stopped near the bed, his weight shifting. She imagined him looking at the rumpled sheets, the open bag, the tactile map spread on the nightstand. His breathing changed, a sharp inhale. He knew she had been there moments before. He began to search, his hands brushing against surfaces, his footsteps growing closer to the dresser. Maya held her breath, her fingers curling around the edge of the cane. She had trained for this. She could strike with precision, a thrust to the knee, a sweep to unbalance. But she waited. His foot landed inches from hers. She could smell him now, a clean, woody cologne over something metallic, like gun oil. He paused, and she knew he was looking down at the gap behind the dresser. Then a sound cut through the silence, a sharp knock at the door, 3 quick raps. Leo's voice, calling her name. The man moved instantly, swift and silent, retreating toward the window. Maya heard it slide open, then the fire escape rattling under his weight. By the time Leo unlocked the door and rushed in, the room was empty except for Maya emerging from behind the dresser, her face set with cold determination. She told Leo what she had heard: leather soles, a specific gait, the scent of gun oil. She added that the man had not spoken a single word. He had come to kill her, and he had almost succeeded. The near miss changed everything. Leo accelerated their timeline. He contacted a former colleague in the federal prosecutor's office, a woman named Diane Reyes who had built a career on dismantling financial crime networks. Reyes was interested but cautious. She needed more than a blind woman's testimony and a dead man's notebook. She needed a connection between Alistair Crane and the murder of Viktor Petrov that would hold up in court. Maya proposed a plan. The Beaumont was preparing to reopen its renovated galleries with a gala exhibition. Woman with a pearl necklace would be the centerpiece. Crane, as the dealer who had brokered the acquisition, was expected to attend. Maya knew the museum's layout better than anyone alive. She could be there, positioned to listen, to record, to identify. Leo argued against it. Crane knew she was a witness, her presence would be a provocation. But Maya reminded him that Crane did not know she could recognize his voice from a single whispered sentence. He did not know the extent of her hearing. She would not confront him. She would simply be there as the restorer who had worked on the painting, an ordinary presence in a room full of wealthy patrons. Leo relented, though he insisted on being nearby, armed with a concealed recording device of his own. The night of the gala, Maya wore a simple black dress and positioned herself near the painting she had spent months restoring. She stood with her cane folded, her posture relaxed, her ears open. The gallery filled with the murmur of conversations, the clink of glasses, the rustle of expensive fabrics. She filtered through the noise, separating individual voices, cataloging them. And then she heard it. That measured, patient cadence. Alistair Crane was speaking to someone a few feet away, his voice low but clear. He was discussing a shipment of paintings leaving Geneva, bound for a private collection in Dubai. The other voice belonged to Gerard Vance, the museum director. Vance sounded nervous, his words rushed. Crane's response was cold: "The board will approve the sale, or they will learn what happens to people who obstruct me." Maya tilted her head slightly, committing every syllable to memory. Then she heard something else. Footsteps approaching from behind. Leather soles, slightly worn. The same gait as the man in her hotel room. Her heart seized, but she did not move. The footsteps stopped beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of another body. A voice, barely a whisper, spoke into her ear: "You should have stayed in the dark." Then the footsteps retreated, swallowed by the crowd. Maya remained still, her hands steady on her cane. She had what she needed. The whisper would be enough to match the voice, and the threat itself was evidence. The next morning, Maya and Leo met with Diane Reyes in a nondescript office building. Maya played the recordings she had made at the gala, the conversation between Crane and Vance, and the whispered threat. Reyes listened with growing intensity. She noted that Crane's recorded words, combined with Petrov's ledger, established a clear motive. The whispered threat, while not an explicit confession, demonstrated Crane's awareness of Maya as a witness and his intent to intimidate her. Reyes filed an emergency request for a wiretap on Crane's communications and a surveillance order on his known associates. But she warned that time was critical. Crane was preparing to move the painting, and with it, the evidence of his laundering scheme, to Dubai within the week. If the painting left the country, it might never be recovered. Maya offered to help in a way no one else could. During the gala, she had not only recorded voices, she had catalogued sounds. The man who had threatened her, the same man who had broken into her hotel room, had a distinctive gait. She had memorized the rhythm of his footsteps, the slight drag of his right heel, the way his weight shifted. She told Reyes that if this man was Crane's enforcer, he would likely be the one assigned to transport the painting. And if he moved through the museum at night, as he had before, Maya could identify him by sound alone. Reyes hesitated. Using a blind civilian as a human listening post was unorthodox, to say the least. But Leo vouched for Maya's abilities, and time was running out. They devised a plan. The museum would be closed for 2 days before the painting's scheduled shipment. Maya would be inside, hidden in a storage closet adjacent to the loading dock, with a direct audio feed to Leo and a police tactical team stationed nearby. If Crane's man came for the painting, Maya would alert them. The operation was set for the following night. Maya spent the day in her hotel room, reviewing every sound she had catalogued, running scenarios in her mind. She traced the museum map obsessively, her fingers memorizing each corridor and doorway. She knew the building's acoustics better than its architects ever had. When night fell, she was ready. The museum at midnight was a cathedral of silence. Maya sat in the storage closet, her back against a wall lined with cleaning supplies, her ears attuned to the building's breath. The heating system hummed a low drone. Water pipes ticked in the walls. Outside, the city's distant traffic was a constant whisper. Leo's voice came through the earpiece, barely audible, confirming that the tactical team was in position 3 blocks away. They would move on her signal. She had a small button in her palm that would transmit a silent alert. Hours passed. She did not move. She counted her own heartbeats to keep her mind focused. 100. 200. Then, at 1:47 in the morning, she heard it. The east door, the one with the squeaky hinge, opened with a soft whine. Footsteps followed. Leather soles. The gait was unmistakable, right heel dragging, a fraction of a second longer on the left step. The man moved through the loading dock, his steps confident, unhurried. He knew where he was going. Maya pressed the alert button once. A single vibration in Leo's receiver. Then she waited. The footsteps moved past her hiding place, heading toward the main gallery. She heard the creak of the gallery door, then silence as the man entered the space where woman with a pearl necklace hung. She imagined him removing the painting from the wall, cutting it from its frame, rolling it into a tube. Her fingers tightened around her cane. She had not come just to listen. She slipped out of the closet, moving along the wall with her cane extended just inches above the floor, making no sound. She knew every floorboard, every threshold. The gallery door was ajar. She could hear the man's breathing now, concentrated, slightly strained, as he worked. She positioned herself in the doorway, her cane held like a staff. She did not need to see him. She knew exactly where he stood by the sound of his movements against the gallery's acoustics. The whispers of the painting being handled came from the far wall, near the window. Her voice, when she spoke, was calm and clear. "You're going to put the painting down and wait for the police. The movements stopped. A long silence. Then a voice, the same one from the hotel room, cold and amused. "You again. You really shouldn't be here." Maya heard the shift in his weight, the subtle movement that preceded an attack. She had trained for this moment. When his footsteps lunged toward her, she was already moving. Her cane swept low, a precise arc that caught his shins and threw off his momentum. She heard him stumble, a sharp exhale of surprise, his hands grabbing at the nearest display case for balance. Glass rattled. She pivoted, using the sound of his recovery to track his position. His breathing was faster now, angry. He came at her again, this time more cautiously, his footsteps measured. She retreated into the gallery, her back finding the wall, her cane extended like a barrier. The room's acoustics were her ally. She could hear the direction of his approach, the way his shoes gripped the polished floor, the slight hiss of fabric as he reached for something, a weapon, perhaps. She did not wait. She pushed off the wall and moved sideways, circling around a marble pedestal that she knew was in the center of the gallery. Her cane tapped it once, confirming its location, then she used it as a shield. The man's hand closed on empty air where she had been a second before. He growled in frustration. She could hear his rage building, making his movements less controlled, his breathing heavier. She led him around the pedestal, using the echoes of her own footsteps to confuse his sense of direction. Her cane clicked on the floor in one spot, then she moved silently to another, letting the sound mislead him. He swung at the sound, hitting the pedestal with a grunt of pain. She was already behind him, her cane raised. She brought it down across the back of his knees with all the force she could muster. He collapsed with a sharp cry, his body hitting the floor hard. She heard the clatter of a metal object skidding across the marble, a knife, she realized. She kicked it away, then stepped back, her cane pointed toward him like a spear. She could hear him breathing heavily on the floor, trying to rise, his joints stiff with pain. "Stay down," she said. "The police are already inside." As if on cue, she heard the distant sound of the east door being forced open, then the thunder of boots running through the loading dock. Leo's voice came through her earpiece, "We're in. Don't move." Flashlights swept the gallery a moment later, their beams reflecting off the walls in ways Maya could perceive as a shift in ambient light. Hands seized the man on the floor. Voices shouted commands. Maya lowered her cane and leaned against the wall, her legs trembling with adrenaline. She had done what she set out to do. The man on the floor was identified as Damian Cross, a former military contractor with a criminal record that spanned 3 countries. He had been Alastair Crane's enforcer for nearly a decade, responsible for at least 4 known violent incidents that had previously been ruled accidents. In his jacket pocket, police found a rolled tube containing woman with a pearl necklace, removed from its frame with the kind of practiced efficiency that spoke to years of theft. More importantly, the knife he had dropped bore traces of blood that would later be matched to a cold case involving one of Crane's former associates. While Cross was being taken into custody, a second team executed a simultaneous raid on Alastair Crane's penthouse apartment. Crane was found at his desk, shredding documents. The shredder was seized before it could destroy the last batch, a set of financial records that connected him to a network of shell companies in the Cayman Islands, Switzerland, and Singapore. The records matched the information in Viktor Petrov's ledger, providing the evidentiary chain that prosecutors needed. Gerard Vance, the museum director, was arrested the following morning at his home. Faced with the recordings Maya had made at the gala, he agreed to testify against Crane in exchange for a reduced sentence. His testimony would reveal that Vance had known about the painting's stolen provenance but had accepted Crane's bribes to look the other way. The Beaumont's board of directors issued a public apology and announced a full audit of its entire collection. Woman with a pearl necklace was removed from display pending its restitution to the descendants of the family from whom it had been stolen in 1942. Maya was not present for any of these events. She spent the day after the confrontation in her hotel room, sleeping for 14 hours, her body finally releasing the tension of weeks of vigilance. When she woke, Leo was there with coffee and a newspaper. He read her the headlines: art dealer charged in international money laundering scheme, blind restorer credited with foiling theft. Maya asked him to stop reading. She did not want to be a hero. She wanted to go back to work. The months that followed brought resolution and change. Alistair Crane's trial was swift, the evidence against him overwhelming. The recordings, the ledger, Cross's testimony, and Vance's cooperation painted a portrait of a man who had built an empire on stolen art and laundered money. Crane was convicted on charges of conspiracy, money laundering, and the murder of Viktor Petrov. He received a sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole. Damian Cross was convicted of assault, attempted murder, and his role in Petrov's death, receiving a concurrent sentence of 30 years. For Maya, the aftermath was quieter. She returned to her studio, though she chose a new location, a smaller space with better locks and a window that opened onto a courtyard instead of an alley. Leo remained a friend, visiting weekly to share coffee and discuss the details of cases he was now consulting on privately. He had found new purpose in working with civilians who had been dismissed by the system, and Maya had become his unofficial partner in a handful of investigations that required a subtle ear. But her primary focus was her restoration work. The Beaumont, eager to repair its reputation, offered her a permanent position as head conservator. She accepted on the condition that she would have final say over the provenance research for any acquisition. The board agreed. Her first project was the restoration of a small Renaissance portrait that had been donated anonymously. As her fingers traced the cracked surface, she thought about the layers beneath, the original paint, the overpainting, the history that could not be erased. She understood now that her blindness was not a limitation but a different way of seeing. She heard things others missed, felt things others overlooked. The world she inhabited was built on texture and sound, and it was no less real for being invisible to others. On a cool autumn evening, Maya returned to the Musée Beaumont alone. The renovations were complete, and the building had been restored to its original grandeur. She walked through the galleries with her cane, counting steps, listening to the echoes of her own presence. The halls were empty. She had asked for permission to visit after hours, and the new security team had granted it without hesitation. She made her way to the rotunda where Viktor Petrov had died. The marble floor had been polished, the walls freshly painted, but the acoustics remained the same. She stood in the center, her cane folded, her eyes closed. She listened to the silence. It was a different silence now, one without fear, without the weight of a secret that could kill. She thought about Petrov, a man she had never met whose notebook had changed everything. She thought about Leo, who had believed her when no one else would. She thought about the painting that had been returned to its rightful owners, the family who would finally know what had happened to their inheritance. Then she heard footsteps approaching. Not threatening, familiar. Leo's gait, uneven and deliberate. He stopped beside her and said nothing. They stood together in the rotunda for a long moment. Finally, Maya spoke. I used to think that losing my sight was the worst thing that could happen to me. Now I think it was the thing that saved me. It taught me to listen. And sometimes listening is more powerful than seeing. Leo placed a hand on her shoulder. What do you hear now? She smiled, a small, quiet smile. I hear the building settling. I hear the city outside. I hear nothing that needs to be fixed. They walked out together into the night, leaving the museum behind them. Maya Lambert did not need to look back. She carried the memory of the place in her hands, in her ears, in the map she had traced 1,000 times. And she knew that whatever came next, she would face it the same way she had faced everything, by paying attention to the sounds the world tried to hide. In the end, the truth had a frequency of its own. All you had to do was listen.